Hey, Dad, welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast. On today's show, we're going to do two things. First, Lawson and I decided we'd like to share with you a little bit about the kitchen that we make these shows in, back in the back, where like it's him and me throwing flour, and sometimes Alex throws in an idea, our producer, my son. And we want to just share with you a little bit about how the kitchen works at Father on Purpose, not because we have a weird fascination with how we arrive at show topics, but because I think you probably deserve to know, what do we care about? What do we think about? How do we arrive at the content that makes its way onto the show? As the show has grown, we've gotten more people reach out to us for interviews. They got a book coming out. They got a movie coming out. And so we just have more content than we are ever going to be able to get to. So the process of sorting through all that and sifting it, we thought might be interesting to you. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we've arrived at the next 6 to 12 months worth of episode ideas, so that you know how we got there, and you know the spirit of it, not just so you know where the train is headed, but you know how the conductors think about where the train is headed, so you can decide whether you want to stay on this train or not. So if today is your first ever Father on Purpose episode, you picked either a really great episode to dial into for the first time or a terrible episode to dial in for the first time, because you're going to know in about 10 minutes whether you want on this bus or off this bus. Second, this will not just be a sneak preview of 2026. We're recording this in January of 2026. This won't just be a sneak preview of the next 12 months. We're actually going to dive into the first episode of a 6-part series called From Overwhelmed to Intentional. And it's the attempt we're going to make at helping dads move from being overwhelmed by their responsibilities and the weight of fatherhood to being intentional and living in peace and freedom and joy as they walk out their fatherhood journey. We're going to get to that as the second thing. So we hope that little mini series will be beneficial to you. We're going to start it today, kick it off, give you a flyover of the 5 future weeks of that series, and specifically give you a key takeaway from today's show that if one of those 5 areas is kind of your thing, we'll give you some ideas you can use for the next week as you prepare for the drop of that next episode. Before we dive into all that content, remember 2 things, please. Number 1, we now have 92 members of the Fatherhood Guard. Maybe you're one of the 8 who needs to join in and get us over the 100 monthly supporters mark. As you know, podcasts and shows take effort and energy and time and money to produce. We could use your support at our ministry. This stuff doesn't happen for free. Go to manhoodjourney.org/guard, GUARD, to become part of the Fatherhood Guard, which is our monthly group of supporters who kick in anywhere from $10 a month to $1,000 a month. That's our current range. Feel free to be a curve buster. Come in at $2,000. We would love that. That'd be fantastic. We need supporters, and maybe that's you. Go to manhoodjourney.org/guard. Secondly, go to rangeleather.com. Go to rangeleather.com and use the code MJ15 to get 15% off your next purchase. Range Leather is a USA-based company in Laramie, Wyoming, run by Kyle Koster and a great team out there who create amazing leather products from USA Horween leather. It is high quality, amazing stuff. Watch bands, bags, earrings, wallets, folios, desk items, you name it, they've got it in high quality leather. As they say, products that are built to wear in, not wear out. I've got several of their products myself. Love Range Leather, love the team there, love the way they run their business. More power to Range Leather. Go to rangeleather.com because they support our show, and use the code MJ15. So Lawson, as we dive in today, let's talk a little bit about the kitchen, which you and I spent an hour and a half in earlier this week, planning out the next several months worth of episodes. When you think about sort of show planning and kind of how we got to the list of shows we want to do for the remaining months of this year, what are some thoughts you think would be beneficial to the dad listening?
Fantastic intro, by the way. So it was important that you and I are on the same page in prayer and thought, just for what this is. And, I've said it many times. If there were 0 listeners, I would still love doing this with you, just from a selfish standpoint. It's just, It's just it feeds me. But is it right? Is it aligned with what God would have us do and say and think about, talk about? And just you just have to take a pause every now and then, and get together. So it was really cool for us to just spend some time talking about it, and I think we came up with a good, not only do we want to be purposeful in the show and what we're doing, but we want to be aligned to God's word. We want to be, you know, talking about things that are, kind of hit the mark. We're not here trying to talk about, how can you just be a better dad. Generally speaking, this is a father on purpose from a biblical standpoint. So I think we came up with, some of the building blocks. We don't have to have the entire 52 episode year plotted out exactly. But it helped me too, just to, what we don't do. You and I have really made an effort not to wing it, not to, you know, not for Alex to hit record and us just kind of fly by the seat of our pants. But we also don't want to script, everything. And I think that's an important
Fine
two
line.
two things that matter to me. If I feel like I'm listening to someone just kind of reading a script, and going word for word, that's not always, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a natural conversation to me. It's not as interesting, and the stories and the people we talk to, all of that contributes to kind of the flavor. Um, and then, the planning is individual episodes. Yes, we take notes, we compare notes, we think and talk through, like, what is this episode going to be about? But then from like, are we aligned with what God would have of this um effort? And I'm talking about not just you and me and Alex, but like the community. Where are we dads? We've never ever tried to come across as like Kent and Lawson have the answers. Like we're the dads on the pedestal. Do what we do. Listen to what we say because we have all the answers. It's us. It's all of us, and we love the feedback that we get from you guys through either the website, through SpeakPipe, which we'll talk about in a little bit, on the website, emails, texts, phone calls. Those all matter, and it helps. But I want to do two things here, Ken. I want to back up to the survey
Mm,
that was done a long time ago and include the state of biblical fatherhood, because part of the underlying reason that we feel and that manhood journey as an organization, as a ministry feels is important to do the podcast for, is to answer some of the feedback that is given by dads on the things that they struggle with and the places they find success with. I say they, I mean we. Um, and so I'd love for you to just kind of set a bit of a background on the initial survey, how and why, what did it originate? And then so I've got our list of all the answers that dads answered with, and there were hundreds and hundreds of dads that participated, and like, I don't know, I didn't count, but I'd say roughly 50 items that were portrayed as things that, are tough as a dad. And so were those multiple choice? Was there, they type it in? It's been a while since we've talked about this. So refresh me on that, but then also just from a background standpoint, talk about that and how that led into the state of biblical fatherhood, because that's the undergirding of why this podcast exists.
We've done two different kinds of surveying over the years. One is open field, where we ask a dad, what's your greatest challenge? And we intentionally leave it open, where he types in an answer, long form. And there's a lot of reasons we do that. For the data scientists out there, they would recognize that as qualitative surveying as opposed to quantitative. And we do that so we can get like the essence of what they're saying, right? The nuance behind some of the answers. Because if you just give them a 5-point drop down list, you lose some of that nuance. Compare that to, we also have the state of biblical fatherhood, or the godly father assessment, that one is more data driven, more quantitative in the sense that we give you 4 choices to every one of the 28 questions. You have to pick from one of those 4. And so that's more data driven. So we've done both. And it's a little bit like kind of looking at an offense and defense in a sports context. You got to have both. You really, if you're trying to learn what's on the hearts and minds of people, it helps to have some quantitative information, some data driven assessment. It also helps to have some qualitative assessment. I've sat across a cup of coffee from, I don't know, 100 to 300 dads over the last 5 or 6 years. And
That's why you're so jumpy.
in the last 2 days, I've sat over 500 cups of coffee. Man, it's been an intense start to the year. But like how they answer says a lot about what they're saying. Right. So if you go, hey, what's your greatest challenge these days? And they just kind of go, I was on the phone yesterday. A Zoom call. And I said to the guy, I said, hey, what's one of the big things you're kind of walking through this year? And even in his body language, his facial expression, he conveyed a sense of like, whew, last year was tough on the marriage. And you could just see it in his body. You could interpret things that if he had checked marriage off of a list, you wouldn't have gotten. So we've done all that, put all that into various tools. One is human, based just assessment. The other is ChatGPT, pretty helpful, looking at trends and looking at sort of what things kind of go together. That's been a valuable tool. But here's what we're going to talk about is not just, I want the dad hearing to know, we're not just going to talk about what we found and what we've learned. We're going to talk about what we believe some of the antidotes are to those specific dad challenges. If you feel overwhelmed, if you feel like you are a failure as a dad, you feel like you're not managing your time well, you feel like your past has disqualified you, those kinds of things. If you feel that way, number one, so do thousands of other dads. And I've got a long list of data to prove it. So I hope that helps. But secondly, what we want to tell you is there are some ways to not feel that way. Right. Some folks, I had a friend of mine named Trey down in Florida, one of our board members, and he goes, Kent, man, there's 2 kinds of people in the world. One kind of guy is standing outside and his house is burning. And he says, hey, my house is burning. Will you stand here while I complain about it? He goes, the other guy says, hey, man, my house is burning. Will you help me put out the fire? And he goes, I'll help that second guy all day. But that first guy drives me crazy. And so that's a great way to think about it. So if you're the dad coming here just going, oh, life's hard, can't handle it, it's terrible, I got no hope, and you want us to reinforce the fact that you have no hope and just commiserate with you, hang up now. Like delete this podcast from your feed because we want to help you move from being overwhelmed to being intentional.
Yeah.
To living in panic to living in peace. Right? From living in confusion to living in confidence. Like we want to help you make that transition so that 2026, if we resurveyed you a year from now, you wouldn't go, same problem, different day. Like that's not our vibe. And some people want to just live in their pain, live in their problems. We want to help pull you out of that. That's our intent.
Yeah. Let me
go ahead.
Let me describe kind of back to the kitchen metaphor. Where we landed was, I'd call them, I don't know about type of episode, but that's a good enough description. So we'll go with type. And there are 5 of them. And so, you guys who have been listening for a while, you guys know that periodically we get to talk to a guest. And so that would be the interview type. And those are usually just different. They coincide with maybe the practical purposefulness of what we're trying to convey, but they also just are nice to hear a different voice, and fortunately, mostly because of your network and the network of, the board of Manhood Journey and others that contribute to finding interesting, insightful, and the right person for our podcast, for this audience. Those interviews are generally a highlight to me.
Yeah.
Like I really
We've had some great
dig
people
those.
on. Yeah.
Huh?
We've had some great people on.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're going to keep doing that. We're shooting for around 12 of those episodes. And then there are some special days, Valentine's Day, Mother's
Mhm.
Day, Father's Day. We want to be purposeful about how we approach some of these kind of keynote days of the year. And so we'll do
Kent's
those.
birthday,
Huh?
my
Kent's
birthday.
birthday?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, that's a
That's one
very
that
important
we
day for our
will
community.
probably skip over, and, we'll fold that in somewhere else. Maybe just you and me.
Hmm.
We can keep that in the kitchen,
Hmm.
Kent.
Hmm.
Um, and then what's really important, and I think this is maybe a starting point, starting block, is some biblical chapter series. This is not a self-help that we just kind of wing it and come up with stories and successes that other people have done in the past. It needs to be tied back to the Bible. And so that is a type. We want to do probably 3 or 4 series. So we'll take a book of the Bible, or maybe a handful of scripture that tie together well, and do 3 or 4 episodes just on those. And so do the math, that's another 12 or 15. We have a couple of series that we want to do. One is this dad challenge series that we're talking about. One is maybe the 5 key mistakes. That would be, those two would be their own separate series somewhere in the year. And then what I think is really cool is your idea, Kent, on Manhood Journey having the U version app reading plan discussions. I think those are fantastic. Just tag into those, and they're on the Manhood Journey website, and want to get you to explain that, because that'll be something I feel like is an interesting tie, and so the information is out there, and we can dig into it, verbally, and go through it, as you and I can just go do that as we talk about it. But it's also going to be, participation among guys that want to jump in there too. So, will you talk through what I may have missed on
Yeah.
the episode
Yeah.
types, and
I think you nailed
specifically
them. I think
the
I'll
YouVersion reading plan?
Yeah, I think you nailed them. I'll just dive a little deeper in one or two. On the YouVersion reading plans, it's a little bit like when you have a friend over and they always walk in your front door and they sit in your dining room and then they walk back out your front door and then leave. And you think, man, they've never seen the basement or they've never seen the back deck, or that's like parts of your house
Okay.
where they haven't explored.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I routinely run into guys who will think of what we do at Manhood Journey where they've only seen 1 or 2 rooms in the house. They've only been in the kitchen. They've only been in the dining room. They've never been in the living room. We're out on the back deck. And so what I want to expose our listeners to are some of those other resources. So for example, we've published, I think we're up to 13 or 14 YouVersion reading plans. So if you think to yourself, man, I sure wish there were some guided Bible reading plans that I could use from the device I have in my pocket every day, my iPhone or Android, and I sure wish they were everywhere and I could get to them easily and they had scripture backing them and they were, well, they are. Like you may not even know that we have them, but they are. They're out on the YouVersion Bible app, and you can find them lots of ways. You can come to our website. So we're going to go through one of those or 2 of those this year. And we might even experiment with making it a community event. So, for example, one of those reading plans is 5 days. And the idea is you'd read them, day after day. We may take 1 week between episodes and encourage you guys all to join me and Lawson on the Bible app and go through it together. I did this a couple years ago with my son and one of his friends. The 3 of us read through the Bible in a year, and we would have, our checkpoints, a little bit of accountability. There's a chat feature in the YouVersion Bible app. It's okay. It's not as good as some other chat features. No offense to the YouVersion Bible team, but I don't think they've spent as much money in that area. But it's solid. But you can talk to each other, share an idea about the scripture. We might invite you to participate in that with us on the Bible app just for fun. See how it works. The only other thing I would add to what you said is we would love input or feedback. I would like for the future of the Manhood Journey podcast to be increasingly driven
Yeah.
by the user community that is enjoying it. So if that's you, if you're listening to this show and you think, man, I really enjoy the Manhood Journey podcast. I enjoy Father on Purpose podcast. I enjoy Kent and Lawson. It's fun. Okay, listen, we have an assignment for you. Go to manhoodjourney.org/podcast. manhoodjourney.org/podcast. podcast and scroll down till you see the give us some feedback area. It's a tool called SpeakPipe. It's like a voicemail system. You click on it, you talk into your computer, we get an email with a link to your voice. You get 2 or 3 minutes. I can't remember how long, less than 5. Go there and tell us what you want to hear. Tell us about your experience as a dad last year. Tell us about what you're working on as a dad in the coming year, an area of growth or an area of struggle or an area of, redemption. You'd like to see God move in your life. Give us your beautiful voice and let us hear your own thoughts on the topic of biblical fatherhood. We might use it on a future show, but I can guarantee you we're going to listen to it end to end and consider it in our run up to producing content. I would love it if like most of the weeks were like the digital mailbag and we just cracked open the mailbag and we addressed a specific challenge, issue, or praise from a dad in a specific part of the world. Man, do it. Go to manhoodjourney.org/podcast.
Yeah. And part of the purpose of this podcast is to bring awareness to all the resources of Manhood Journey as a ministry. And the podcast is a great way to do that. So we want to ask you guys too to share it.
Yeah.
Share with other
Yeah, great
guys
point.
in your life that you already interact with, or be attentive I'd love for you to listen out and as you meet somebody, remember this and think, while you're talking to this guy, you know what? I think the podcast would be good for this guy. Please share it and spread the word. I think there is a real need nowadays for dads to hear from other people and hear from, biblical resources, and Manhood Journey is full of them. So it's a really good place for dads to go get information, and we're all out here striving to be better godly dads, and that's a wonderful, wonderful place. Like I said in the show that I did by myself, you need manhoodjourney.org and a Bible. uh, you know, I'm
And not in that
oversimplifying.
order, just to make sure everybody knows.
What?
I said, and not in that order. You need the Bible and then manhood
Right, right,
journal.
right, right. Yeah. So anyway, I think we've covered the kitchen metaphor of how we do this thing, and one more time, you guys, please participate.
Yeah,
It
dive
really
in.
means a lot, and it is good, valuable information that we can gather from you guys. This is not the Kent and Lawson show alone. We need you guys. We want you, and we appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm thinking of guys like Scott in Florida, Scott in South Carolina, Lee in Texas, Tim in on the Northwest in Northern California. Uh, all kinds of people who come to mind. Alex in Michigan, Dan in Michigan, people who I think of around the world. If I look at a map, I can think of guys who specifically have my cell number and my email address. I've sat across the coffee from many of them, or we've talked on the phone or on a Zoom. Nothing makes me happier than to hear from dads and hear what we can help them with, or how we've helped them, or what in the future they might want some ideas around. Boy,
Yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Today, we're going to
There
kick
we go.
off a 6-part series. So it's this episode plus 5 more that we're going to call From Overwhelmed to Intentional. And the idea behind this series is that there are 5 ways most dads could move from overwhelmed to intentional. And what we're going to do on today's show is give you a sneak preview of the next 5 weeks, but embedded in the sneak preview will be some things you can do right now. So this is not just a, hey, tune in next week for the real meat. There's going to be some, I think, helpful ideas shared over the next 10, 15 minutes. But we're going to dive deeper in each one of these. So again, back to what you said a minute ago, Lawson, if you want to send this to a dad, you can know what's about to happen over the next 5 weeks. And it's a great time to say, hey,
Right.
the guys at Father on Purpose are going to cover these 5 big challenges dads have. And we're going to dive into them biblically. We're going to dive into them experientially, tell stories. And it's a great time to share it. If you feel overwhelmed as a dad, if you feel overwhelmed as a husband, a leader, an employee, a volunteer, a pastor, we want to help you reduce that tension. We want to replace it with peace. We won't be able to remove all of your challenges, but we believe we can help you redeem them. All those start with R, Lawson. I thought you'd be impressed with the alliteration. And I didn't even get that from ChatGPT. I thought of that out of my own head. And then walk in a way that's not as stressed out and tense as a dad. The big lie, not the big lie, one of the big lies that Satan tells us is that we can feel a certain way on the inside, but behave a different way on the outside. And it's not usually how it works. I mean, you can compartmentalize to some degree. However, if you're nervous, tense, anxious, frustrated, it's going to probably come out. Like your wife and your kids can feel it often better than you can. Over Christmas, April, my wife said, "Man, for like several days in a row, you've just been really chippy and short with us."
Oh.
And I'm like, what do you mean? Give me some examples. And she's like,
No,
this
I'm
and that,
not.
and this and that.
You're being
Yeah, no, I'm
chippy.
not crying. You're crying. And she was able to list off these little moments, none of which were a big deal. It's not like I was throwing dishes at the wall or, screaming at the top of my lungs, but I had a pattern of like just tension, and she could feel it, and the
Yeah.
boys could feel it.
Yeah.
So as we dive into these next 5 weeks, in the back of your mind, I want you to keep asking yourself, do you feel that way? And if you do, probably odds are the people around you can sense it and can feel it. So let me talk about the first one. First one.
This one is based on, not something that was pulled out of a hat. It came from the feedback. This is what some guys have said they struggle with.
Absolutely.
Allocating my limited time, not enough time each day. So, both of those ring true. Procrastination, being intentional and focused, energy after work, and then the last one was running out of time. So that is why I think episode 1 is important as a starting point. It made me think about, like, where do you start? If you feel overwhelmed but want to move toward being intentional, sometimes you just gotta recognize that that's how you feel, Like, I think about, somebody that maybe, I don't know, 100 pounds overweight or $20,000 in debt, and you look at that and go, "I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to get this burden off my chest. I want to, I have the desire to, but it just feels so overwhelming. It feels like almost hopeless because it's just so big to me. Like, how do you tackle that? And we'll get into that. Um, and maybe you are. Maybe you're there, you have the desire and you've begun sort of, but you're doing kind of just enough to get by. That 20,000 in debt is creeping slowly each month or week by 10, 20, $50, and you just know, that's just getting by. That's not solving the problem, or you've lost 5 of the 100 pounds, but it's been, 2 months and it goes up and down and up and down. So I get the feeling. I totally get that feeling where you're just, like, overwhelmed and don't know where to begin.
The big lie that we're told in that area is that if we only had more time, and then you just fill in the blank. Actually, no. Here's your quick takeaway for that particular episode, and we're going to unpack it and talk more next week about this specific line. You don't need more time. You need more clarity about what matters most this season. You don't need more time. You don't need a 25-hour day. You don't need a 30-hour day. You need clarity about what matters most this season. About a year and a half ago, maybe 2 now, we had radio personality Brant Hansen on the show, and he has a book where he talks about the kind of men that we need. I'm trying to think of the title of the book, but if you go back and Google it or ChatGPT it, you'll find. In the book, he talks about seasons of life and how you might not be in a position where he talks about getting a new truck in the book. And he's like, however, you may be under like heavy mortgage debt. You may be under credit card debt. Your kids might be going to a private school and that's money flowing out, whatever it might be. You may be under immense financial pressure and you want to go buy a new truck. It's not the season for you to buy a brand new current year truck. Like, time out. You think, man, how can I afford this brand new truck and all these other things? Well, all those other things are sending you a signal about what kind of vehicle you can afford. So you don't need more money. You need more priorities as to your season of life. And the same is
Right.
true for time.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll get into these, next week, but Psalm 90 verse 12 says, "So teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom." So it's like time awareness is gotta come from
That's right.
understanding your days, and understanding the timeline and how much time you do have, and being aware of that, not only in a long-term sense, but also in the moment. And then, Ephesians 5, verse 15 and 16. "Look carefully then how you walk,
Mm,
not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil." And so, you've mentioned before, sort of a metaphor, I guess, for this is like, look, if you have a terminal disease diagnosis, guess what? You are probably, and let's say you're only given 90 days, or else it's going to be really bad. You'll find a way to get what you need, or to change your lifestyle, or to get on the dock of the doctor, and get the meds or whatever. Versus if you're like, "Yeah, I'll work on my health at some point." Well, you'll work on it when it becomes super critical, and I think we are in a critical time.
yeah.
If you go back and look at the survey results, it's just time,
Yeah.
energy, attention, relationship. It is critical. 75% of our time is spent with our children before they turn, I think it's 17 or something like that, because then they get friends and the driver's license and go to schools and go off and do whatever. And so it is super critical, and I don't want to be dramatic, but have we as an American culture been diagnosed with a terminal disease called lack of fatherhood? Some would argue maybe, yeah, and so
Yeah.
it's on us to recognize that, and be aware, and get going. The key is to start. Um, Motivate yourself for today. Don't worry about
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Jesus says tomorrow has enough trouble of its own.
That's right.
Think about what is happening today. And we're not saying go spend an extra 2 hours or something like that. I'm saying, like, just start. Get 5 minutes alone with your kid and go for a little walk, or go throw the ball, or go sit and quiet, and just hear about their day, and be really focused and really intentional on listening.
Well,
Little things can get you started.
which leads us directly to number two. That one of the top issues guys cite in our surveys is they don't have enough time. The second biggest issue they cite has something to do with communication, about getting our
Mm,
kids to listen or getting them to talk. I'm gonna share 4 or 5 ways guys have said this, and you listen to these and tell me if any of these strike a chord with you. Your big struggle is, as a dad, is improving communication, finding common ground, having meaningful conversations, getting my kids to listen to me, or dealing with backtalk or disrespect. Do any of those strike a chord? And if you're like most dads, all 5 struck some kind of chord with you
yeah.
where you're like, oh, yeah, I have felt that pain. And as you said just now, Lawson, one of the secret weapons of a godly dad is the capacity to listen. I often look at like interchanges with other people, whether it's on a podcast or in a meeting yesterday. I told one of our guys, I said, hey, you're going to run this meeting. But yeah, 10 minutes in, I kind of took it over and I did way too much talking. Right. And I'm aware of it. The only credit I can give myself is I think 15 years ago, I wouldn't even have been aware that I did it. At least now I'm aware that I did it. Maybe before I'm 70, I'll learn not to do it. So I'm on the growth curve. As a dad, how well do you listen?
Right.
How well do you listen? And I love this quote. And full disclosure, I was putting all this data into ChatGPT and it cranked out some lines. And one of the lines it cranked out on this topic, which I thought was brilliant, is listening is not weakness. It is fatherhood and leadership leverage.
That's so good.
Ah, what a line. That is such a
Yeah.
great line. How we
Yeah.
listen determines how we father, right? James 1:19, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Proverbs 18, death and life are in the power of the tongue. So how we listen informs how we use our mouths And, that old adage, right? God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Let's use them in proportion. If you consider the fact that he gave you 2 eyes and 2 ears, 4 input devices for 1 output device, that's actually, I think, a little bit of a workable metaphor for most dads, because here's the truth of the matter. If you want to be heard, you have to hear.
Very
It's just
true.
the way it is, man.
Yep.
If you want to be heard, you have to hear. And for you to hear, you got to be an active listener. So number 2, we're going to talk about communication. We're going to talk about back talk. We're going to talk about conversations, finding common ground. And that will be the second in the 5-part series. Lawson, take us through number 3.
Episode 3, dads can feel exposed by this topic. It's am I leading or just reacting? And so, reacting is being a bit maybe unprepared or emotionally not quite ready to address something or hear it. Or maybe you are, but it took you off guard and you reacted too quickly. And then you have to back the train up, and go back and think it through and maybe more purposefully address what's going on. Um, Not to get off on a tangent, but there's something that I want to address with Olivia. Nothing's wrong. It's just about time to broach a topic. And there were times during the holidays where it was just she and I, but I don't know, it just didn't feel right. I wasn't assured in my own kind of position with it. And so I waited. And I'm going to trust God to present the right time and opportunity for that kind of thing to happen. But I'm going to lead her to a place. But I don't want to do it in a way that's like it comes up because of something and then I overreact or
Right.
react. And, I haven't been purposeful about it. Because what you can do is cause a setback to happen, which none of us want. Ephesians 6 verse 4 is something we'll highlight. It says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." And so, what I'm going to do with Olivia she's not running off course, faith wise or anything like that. It's just a moment, it's just a dad moment for her longer term wisdom. And so, addressing something through leadership and what I think, the line that you mentioned before, listening is not weakness, it's leverage. Listening is leverage. That helps build a relationship that you can then, with episode 3, we'll talk about, then leverage for leadership.
Yeah. I had a boss who used to approach conversations. And I thought the way he did it was brilliant. He would say, "Hey, Ken, I have a question." His name was James. And he said, James would say, "I have a question. But when I say it, it's going to sound more provocative than I mean for it to sound."
Yeah, I remember
And I
that.
just love that. It's like
Yeah.
it keeps your wall down. As a dad, you can say, "Hey, man, I want to bring up a subject, but the subject all by itself may sound provocative. I don't mean for it to sound provocative. I just mean for it to get us on the topic. So can I get grace in how I bring it up?" And then they're like, "Sure." It's interesting to me how that got him through a lot of, and then he would say, "How come your sales numbers are so pathetic?" I think you wanted that to sound provocative, James. It was kind of like, "With all due respect," the very next thing is going to be
Yeah,
very
exactly.
disrespectful. No, it was brilliant. And he meant it. He was sincere. So in number 3, we're going to talk about leading versus reacting. In number 4, week number 4, we're going to talk about discipling others while you yourself are a work in progress. This is where a lot of dads can disqualify themselves either completely or in a section or compartment of life. So, for example, the dad may be in a bunch of debt financially. So he goes, "You know what? I'm not going to teach my kids anything about money because I've got no right to teach them about money because I'm in so much debt." Where over here on, golf game or sexual purity or Bible knowledge, he might be doing great work, but he just disqualifies himself in the area of finance because he hasn't done it perfectly.
I've
You
done
don't
that.
need to be the expert.
Yep.
You need to be the example. And so Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ." Well, every dad who hears that ought to be thinking, "Man, how I follow Christ is flawed, imperfect, inconsistent, not reliable. That's what I'm teaching my kids?" Yes, exactly. Because in the end, what do you need? You need God's grace, right? Christian life is not about stacking the Lego bricks perfectly so that nothing ever falls. It's about seeing the flaws and imperfections in our walk and still being able to disciple others. If you're waiting to be perfect to disciple, you will die having never intentionally discipled. Like, it ain't going to happen. So you may be unsure where to begin. You may wonder about owning your own faith and how your kids do or don't own their faith. You may be worried about teaching the Bible or trusting God or whatever those topics are, because you yourself don't feel like you're the perfect expert. You've withdrawn from that part of your life, or as a dad in general. So week 4, we're going to talk about discipling others even while we ourselves are works in progress.
Yeah.
Lawson, week 5.
Yeah. It goes along with episode 5 about, what if you feel like it's too late or you've made too many mistakes? The takeaway on this episode is God does some of his best work after we think we've failed. And the data says that, guys are unsure where to begin. They are maybe lost over guilt that they have something they've done in the past, so they just kind of sit stagnant. Or the child is too far gone. We had Scott McClellan on the show, and he literally and physically lost his daughter. It wasn't figuratively. She was taken and got into some really bad stuff. If you haven't heard that episode, we'll put it in the show notes. That is one for the books, man. And speaking of book, he wrote a book about it. We'll put that in the show notes, but it showed that it's not too late. I mean, that was a hopeless journey that Scott felt like he and his family were on. And then you look at like Paul. If you'd have looked at Paul and said he's going to be one of the ones that writes many of the books of the Bible and just spreads the gospel, well, he was killing anyone who believed in Christianity, and you would have said it's too late for that guy. He's way too far gone. God does his best work in the midst of failures and loves helping us overcome. So we are going to embrace that in episode 5. What if you feel it's too late? And we'll go down that road there.
In that episode, we'll talk at least a little about Luke 15 and God's posture toward wandering children. And we often think of like the story of the prodigal son, and we put ourselves in the role of the dad in the equation, and we think about our prodigal kids. At the same time, God is the father in that equation, and we are the wandering child. So like you can put yourself in one of many places. You're the dad in the equation. You are the prodigal who runs off. You're the righteous older brother who stays home and expects something from God, etc. So like 3 or 4 main characters in that story. Sometimes we only look from the dad down and we forget. Sometimes we're the prodigal. Sometimes we have run from God.
Yeah.
And
right.
One of the reasons we feel distant from our family is because we feel distant from God. Well, guess what? He didn't move. It's not him. The North Pole didn't move. You just got off target, and we can easily do that. In fact, I think, life is just a series of, reacclimating ourselves to the right direction, because we're never perfectly on target. And so we're going to address that in week 5. We hope that as we go through these big 5 areas, we're going to help you move from feeling overwhelmed to feeling intentional, from overwhelmed to intentional. And just like on a personal note, as Jesus' ministry grew, and as he got quote unquote older in the ministry, even though his ministry was very brief time-wise, as it grew and he gained influence, seems to me like you could track, he spent more time in prayer, more time in solitude, and more time with God the Father. And others have written and talked about that topic. It's not an original idea of mine, but as our Father reach grows. So I was with somebody not too long ago, and they were having it was 4 or 5 grandbabies in like the next 6 months. It's like, or they just had one. Scott, friend of mine, I walked in from the parking lot at church, and I just happened to bump into a friend of mine who had a bunch of kids, 8 or 9 children. I can't remember the exact number. Sorry, Scott. But each of his kids either just had a baby or is pregnant, almost all of them. Like, it's crazy. And so that's not totally true, but many. And so he just had 1 or 2 grandkids in the last couple months. In the next 4 months, he's got 2 or 3 more coming. And so as his family grows, it grows kind of exponentially, right? My son got married last month, 2 months, about 6 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the family he married into had like a dozen children. And they got us all together and took like a quote unquote family photo. Bro, it's like 1 million people. It's like you couldn't hardly get the
Yeah.
camera wide enough to take a picture of it. And we probably left somebody out, But the reason I want to share that is at Manhood Journey, as things for us have continued to grow, one of the things I ask God all the time is, hey, God, what can I ignore? What can I safely and faithfully ignore? Years ago, Andy Stanley did a sermon called Choosing to Cheat. And the basic point of the sermon was something has got to give. Something has got to give. You only have 24 hours a day. You only got 7 days a week. Jordan Rayner, in his book, Redeeming Your Time, says you've got to embrace your unipresence. And he goes on to talk about God is omnipresent. You are unipresent. You can only be one place at one time. So be all the way there. Just yesterday, I was talking with a friend of mine named John in Ohio, and he's got a lot going on, right? Wife, kids, a child, a ministry, a church. He's got a lot going on. And as I asked him about his 2026, one of the things he said was he just wants to make sure he focuses well on being a godly husband and a godly dad.
Yeah, if you've got too much going on, you can't focus on the.
And I was like, that is so good. That is so good. So Dad, just a personal note from Kent, the dude who has, 5 sons, 2 daughters-in-law, a 30-year marriage, a lot going on ministry-wise, a lot going on personally. You and I can move from feeling overwhelmed to feeling intentional, to being intentional, when we embrace our Ephesians 2:10 good works, when we have a heart of wisdom, when we manage our time well. When we do those things, we can safely and faithfully ignore the noise and ignore all the extras and all the tangential stuff and focus on what matters most. And we pray, Lawson and I both pray, that you will do that with us over this next year and also over the next 5 weeks as we unpack each of these weeks, because we know one thing's true about all of us who listen to this show. You are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. We'll see you next week.